A regular day in Mexico City, a rundown police station, and a woman walks in, no bodyguards, no fancy title. She's there to help a kid locked up for no reason, but when she asks questions, a cocky cop slaps her hard across the face. He has no idea she's Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico. 4 minutes later, that single slap sets off a firestorm that brings an entire nation to a standstill. Want to know how one moment flipped a corrupt system upside down? Stick around, this story's about to blow your mind. The afternoon fell slowly over Mexico City, wrapping the buildings in an amber hue that softened the edges of the concrete. In the northern part of the city, far from the institutional bustle, a neglected police station seemed submerged in an unshakable routine. Stacks of papers, rough murmurs, and the persistent squeak of an old fan filled the air. Claudia walked alone, without escorts or insignia. She wore an ivory cotton blouse, simple jeans, and a crossbody bag. Her face carried a studied calm. She had left behind the symbols of power to present herself as a citizen. Her reason for being there, Damien, the son of a lifelong friend, had been detained for suspicious behavior while returning from a store with a juice in hand. A tall, dark-skinned young man with dreadlocks and a lively gaze, that was enough. Upon arriving, Claudia approached the front desk. 2 officers were playing with their phones. One looked up, scanned her from head to toe, and let out a mocking smile. "And who are you?" he asked, disinterested. "I'm here to inquire about Damien Rivera. He was detained this afternoon. I'd like to speak with the person in charge of the shift." The officer laughed, glancing at his colleague. "Another worried mother? Or is it his girlfriend?" The other person, a woman with a hardened expression worn by boredom, muttered, "Go to the back if you want, but you won't get anywhere." Claudia walked down the dimly lit hallway, ignoring the comments. Her pulse was steady, though each step increased the tension in her shoulders. She entered a room where a young man with a bruised face sat with his head bowed. It was Damien. When he saw her, his gaze lifted in disbelief. "Claudia!" Before she could respond, a burly officer with visible insignia and an air of superiority stepped in. "Who let you in? You can't be here. Go back where you came from. I just want to know why he's detained. He hasn't committed any crime." "Silence! Neighbors don't come here giving orders. Or do you think you're something special?" And without warning, the officer's hand flew violently, striking Claudia's cheek with a sharp, direct blow. Damien shouted. The room froze. Claudia, staggering slightly, didn't respond with fury. She closed her eyes for a moment, then looked at her watch with surgical precision. "Room TRS now." The silence became a living entity. A murmur of confusion began to spread among the officers. Exactly 3 minutes later, the main door burst open. 5 people in gray suits entered, flashing federal credentials. Federal Oversight Agency. The officer who had struck her paled. Claudia straightened, walked to the center of the room, and with a firm, clear voice revealed the unthinkable. "I am Claudia Sheinbaum, President of the United Mexican States, and you have just crossed a line." Cameras that had been dormant sprang to life. Cell phones began recording. Fear turned to tension, and tension to foreboding. The room, once a haven of impunity, was about to transform into something entirely different. For a few seconds, no one moved. The air seemed thick, heavy. The officer who had struck her, named Palacios, looked around, searching for an invisible escape. Claudia said no more. She sat in an empty chair and watched as the oversight agents began reviewing documents, requesting IDs and issuing orders. Damien remained seated, still not fully understanding, his mouth slightly open, a drop of blood at the corner of his lip. When Claudia looked at him, their eyes met. The president gave him an almost maternal gesture, as if saying without words, "I'm here." A federal agent approached her. "Madam President, how do you wish to proceed?" "I want immediate access to this young man's files, surveillance footage, and the records of the officers present, and I want no one to leave this room." Officer Palacios, the one who had struck her, tried to intervene. "This is a trap. You can't judge us like this, not without—" "Without what, officer?" Claudia interrupted, her voice steady, no longer hiding behind his uniform. The federal agents took control. A technician set up a camera in the center of the room. The president requested that the entire intervention be recorded audio-visually. Then she stood and walked slowly toward Damien. She crouched to his level. "Have you been beaten before, Damien?" Once, when I was 12, they grabbed me with some other kids in a park just for running. Claudia closed her eyes deeply. Memories flooded back. School hallways where, as a teenager, she had been ignored for speaking out against the harassment of an indigenous classmate. Then she understood. This wasn't just about her. It was about everyone. In a side room, she ordered a table set up. She called for coffee, water, recorders, and papers. She summoned the media. The message was clear. This wasn't about a single complaint. It was about a system. Outside, the first journalists began to gather, alerted by an anonymous tip that the president had been physically assaulted inside a police station. What seemed like an act of recklessness was becoming something deeper. The entire country was about to watch. The news spread like damp gunpowder. At first, many didn't believe it. A president assaulted without escorts? But videos began to circulate, captured by the phones of the officers themselves, unable to resist recording the unprecedented. Inside the station, Claudia called for silence. She took a deep breath and requested a portable projector. On the main wall, Officer Palacios' face appeared in different moments, different dates, 12 cases, 12 faces, 12 investigation files that had been left to rot in forgotten archives. This officer has been denounced for abuse, extortion, assault, and discrimination on multiple occasions, Claudia said, flipping through slide after slide. Each of these cases was archived. Each of these victims was ignored. One of the superiors tried to justify. Madam President, we must consider that in this area, many reports are based on grudges or even attempts at sabotage. Sabotage of what, Commander? Of a system of unpunished violence? Claudia asked, her gaze piercing. Justice isn't sabotaged, it's demanded. The tension became unbearable. Outside, a crowd began to gather, citizens with makeshift signs. I was beaten too. My son was detained for no reason. No more abuse. Meanwhile, Claudia received an encrypted message on her phone. They're trying to silence you from within. Orders are coming to shut down the intervention. She wasn't surprised. She simply looked at the camera. I won't stop. Not for me. For them. For us. That night the station didn't sleep. The lights stayed on, traffic was diverted, and helicopters began circling discreetly. Reporters set up in shifts. Something had begun that could no longer be stopped. From her makeshift desk, Claudia reviewed reports delivered by the oversight agency. There were repeated patterns. Detentions without warrants, normalized assaults, classist and racist language in reports, individual with suspicious behavior in commercial area, defiant response from dark-skinned woman, use of arrogant language, no real crimes. This is a map of exclusion, she said to one of the federal lawyers, and it's been endorsed by institutional silence. In a corner, Damien slept on a bench. Claudia watched him silently. Despite the exhaustion, she felt a powerful clarity. Why didn't you notify anyone? Why did you come alone? Asked one of the oversight officers. Because I wanted to know what it feels like to be ignored, to be invisible. Because that's how millions live. I can't represent it if I don't understand what they face. The officer fell silent. A new respect began to form. Outside, the shouts grew louder. Injustice! Enough! President, don't leave us alone! Inside, Claudia closed file number 12, the case of a young trans woman detained for provocative clothing. She felt a pang in her stomach. It wasn't just Palacios. It was an entire system, and that system now had to answer. The following hours were a constant dance of statements, whispers, and revelations. Claudia ordered one-on-one interviews with the station's officers. Some responded with arrogance, others with fear. But one, a young recent transfer named Avila, lowered his gaze when questioned. Is there something you'd like to say? Claudia asked gently. Avila hesitated, bit his lip, and glanced around as if expecting a shadow to fall over him. Yes, Madam President, but not here. He was taken to a separate room. There, in front of 2 oversight lawyers and a human rights representative, Avila confessed. He had audio recordings saved on his phone as a precaution. Racist phrases, threats to complainants, orders to correct attitudes with blows, even a fragment where altering reports was openly discussed. I didn't know what to do. If I spoke, they'd make me disappear. Here, you learn fast that silence protects your life. Claudia took a deep breath. The confession was brutal and courageous. She ordered immediate protection for Avila and began building something more, a network of protected whistleblowers. The fear that held the system upright was starting to crack. Meanwhile, on social media, Claudia Sheinbaum's name trended relentlessly. Some hailed her as a heroine, others questioned her judgment, but the entire country was watching. Someone left a package at the station's door, a manila envelope marked confidential. Inside were internal documents with annotations, irregular payments, falsified patrol routes, names of civilians labeled as social enemies. "This is bigger than we thought," said one of the federal prosecutors. "I know," Claudia replied, "but this time they won't bury it." Dawn broke with gray clouds over the city's north. Inside the station, Claudia had barely slept. The tension showed in her dark circles, but her movements remained firm. That day she called an impromptu press conference, surrounded by cameras and a row of stained, forgotten files. "I come not as a president but as a citizen, as a daughter of this land, as a woman who no longer accepts silence," she began, her voice steady. "What I experienced here, what we've seen together, is just the surface of a problem that's been fermenting in the shadows for decades." She displayed documents, read excerpts from archived complaints, and named names. One caused the room to tremble, a sitting magistrate accused of covering for police involved in disappearances. The reactions were immediate. As she finished, she walked through a crowd that cheered and wept. Ordinary people, mothers, students, taxi drivers, all with similar stories. One, an elderly man, handed her a piece of cardboard with a handwritten message, "Thank you for seeing us." Back inside, she was informed of something new. The central servers of the security ministry showed unauthorized access. Someone was trying to erase the complaints filed that night. Claudia paused, looked at the prosecutor delivering the news, and said, "Activate the secure backup. Call the National Justice Council and get a notary. We're documenting everything." The president was no longer just defending her dignity. She had become the guardian of a truth that threatened to be buried again. The atmosphere grew stifling. Political pressure, veiled threats, and defamation attempts in media allied with certain power sectors intensified. That afternoon, a video began circulating, a crude montage claiming Claudia insulted an officer. Social media divided, but something unexpected happened. An avalanche of people began sharing their own testimonies. Real videos, hidden recordings, written accounts, filled with contained rage. "I was beaten in that station too. My sister was insulted for being indigenous. My cousin was locked up without evidence for 3 days." The authorities couldn't ignore the tide. The National Justice Council issued an emergency resolution. The station would be formally intervened. All officers would be relieved and a mixed commission would take control. Claudia watched from a window as the station's insignia were removed. Then she requested to address the nation directly. In front of cameras without makeup or a teleprompter, she said, "I've lived contempt in my own flesh. But I didn't break, because I'm not alone. We're tired of being afraid. From today, every silenced victim will find a voice in me, and I swear before you, I won't abandon this fight, even if it costs me everything." It was then that she made the decision that would change the course of history. "As of this moment, I establish here a citizen tribunal. Here, ignored voices will be heard. Here begins the justice we're owed." Night fell over the transformed station. It was no longer a prison of impunity. It was a chaotic beacon, yes, but illuminated by hope and righteous fury. Volunteers began arriving, lawyers, psychologists, activists, law students. The space was reorganized. One room received testimonies. Another reviewed legal documents. Claudia didn't rest. She moved between tables, offered coffee, listened. Then Damien, still bearing marks on his face, asked to speak. "I want to tell what happened to me. I want everyone to hear." In front of a simple camera, he began his story. The detention, the insults, the fear, the baseless confinement. The worst wasn't the blow. It was seeing that no one was surprised, as if I was already marked. His voice broke. Claudia approached and hugged him. The entire country saw that moment live. The repercussions were immediate. Universities issued statements, NGOs offered support, and in a symbolic turn, the Supreme Court announced a historic review of police protocols. But not everything was light. That night, Claudia received an encrypted message. They want you out, not just of the case, but of power. Be careful. She took a deep breath and looked at the faces around her. Exhausted but determined youths, mothers clinging to complaint files, elders with fiery eyes. They can't remove me from where I never wanted to be. I came here to stay, not as a president, but as a witness, as a force. And so the movement ceased to be a reaction and began to become a revolution. The dawn was silent, as if the entire city held its breath. Inside the former station, now a citizen tribunal, there was exhaustion and determination. Claudia walked with a sealed folder under her arm. She had received it that morning, a compendium of buried complaints recovered by an anonymous official. On the cover, a single word in red marker, buried. Here's the heart of the monster, she murmured as she opened it. Each page was a wound, names of missing women, tampered records, judges who had halted processes, complicit prosecutors. At the center of the web, an unexpected figure, the Director of Internal Affairs at the Public Security Ministry, a man she herself had appointed during her term. The blow was personal, profound. Betrayal tasted different when it came from someone you trusted. Claudia locked herself away for a few minutes. She cried. Not out of weakness, but because she understood the fight was never against a single sector, a single face. The system was rotten from the root. When she emerged, there was no doubt in her gaze. She gathered her closest team, presented the file's contents, and made an irreversible decision. We're exposing them all, no exceptions, even if it includes people close to me. If I fall, I'll fall with the truth in my hands. A journalist asked if she feared retaliation. Claudia smiled, tired but firm. I don't fear men with power. I fear the silence of the good. And today, those good people are waking up. The consequences were immediate. The buried file was published in full on an international platform. The country entered a state of shock. Well-known, powerful names were exposed. Social media exploded, plazas filled, and the hashtag Zocalo peaked within hours. The National Congress called an emergency session. Some demanded Claudia's removal for misuse of her position. Others defended her as a symbol of a new era. She was invited to appear before legislators. She spoke with disconcerting serenity. I didn't come to ask permission. I came to tell the truth. If that costs a title, so be it. But let it be clear, no one can pretend they didn't know anymore. At the end of her speech, an opposition deputy shouted, "You're dividing the country," and Claudia replied, "I'm forcing it to look in the mirror." The room fell silent. Hours later, the resolution was clear. There would be no sanction, but the pressure on her grew. From military sectors to old allies, whispers began that she should step aside. That night, Claudia wrote a letter, not a surrender but a promise. In a national address broadcast from the former station, now renamed the Center for Truth and Dignity, Claudia made the most unexpected announcement. I resign from the presidency of the Republic, not under pressure, not out of fear. I do so because the fight I've begun requires a freedom the position no longer allows. There was disbelief, tears, fury, but also hope. From this moment, I dedicate my life to the Just Voice Institute, an initiative born from this national wound with a single goal: to train the youth of the margins so they're never silenced again by the system meant to protect them. Damien was the first to raise his voice. Beside him, dozens of youth shouted, "You're not alone, we're here, Just Voice is the future." The media struggled to process the political earthquake. Never had a president resigned voluntarily. Never had someone chosen the people over the chair. In the street, an elderly indigenous woman with silver braids lit a candle in front of the station, murmuring, "Now they hear us, daughter, now they do." A year later, where a gray, filthy building once stood, there was now a plaza filled with murals, gardens, and an open auditorium. In the center, a bronze statue, Claudia standing tall, her face serene, her hand extended toward a child. At the base, an inscription, "Where there was silence, there will be voice. Where there was fear, there will be justice." The Just Voice Institute had grown quickly, with branches in 5 states and over 1,000 youths in training. It was more than an educational center. It was a beacon. Former victims taught human rights. Ex-officers turned allies shared how they broke with the culture of abuse. Victims who once whispered now spoke before packed auditoriums. Damien was one of the program's coordinators. His story was told in universities. His smile became a symbol of resilience. Claudia hadn't returned to the media. She preferred quiet work, but everyone knew she was there, organizing, listening, healing. One day, a girl approached her at the institute. "Are you the president?" "I was. Now I'm something else." "What?" "A teacher. A witness. A free woman." The girl took her hand. "Thank you for defending us." And in that gesture, without cameras, without applause, Claudia felt it had all been worth it, because she never sought revenge, glory, or power, only justice, and she had achieved it. This story teaches us that one voice, no matter how small, can shatter silence and spark change. Claudia Sheinbaum didn't just fight for Damien, she stood for everyone ignored by a broken system. Her courage shows us that justice starts when we refuse to look away, whether it's calling out wrong in our communities or standing up for a stranger. In life, we face moments where it's easier to stay quiet, but this story reminds us, real power lies in speaking up, even when it's hard. So what's your moment to make a difference? Take that first step. Big or small, it counts. Thanks for joining me on this journey. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that inspire. Drop a comment below. What's one thing you'd stand up for? Let's keep the conversation going.